Yo, here's what's coming up next on this special edition of Holy Smoke Cigars and Spirituality called The Truth About Fornication.
But one of the things I think is consistent when it comes to sexual ethics, that what is being critiqued are acts of sexual violence, rape, abuse, and exploitation. None of these texts, I contend, are condemnations of consensual sexual ethical behavior, whether it's mono, poly, same gender loving. The theme for me that's clear is that ethically, the notion that these texts are condemning people's consensual, open, honest, loving choices and decisions is something that is decidedly against. I think that's an important theme that's consistent.
That was our special guest for this recording, Dr. Delman Coates, a New Testament scholar and pastor of the Mount Enon Baptist Church in Clinton, Maryland. And we're actually recording this because of a message that he preached. So in his message, he gave a justice-oriented, scholarly take on the term fornication. In essence, he was just saying that the term fornication in the Bible refers more so to exploitation and sex trafficking than it does consensual sex between unmarried adults. And because of this scholarly insight, the Christians have been crashing out everywhere. The Christian YouTubers have been on his neck. Just last week, some protesters gathered outside of his church on Sunday. Not because he harmed anybody, not because he took advantage of anybody or exploited anybody, but because he dared to say that consensual sex between unmarried adults is not a crime, it's not a sin, it's humans being human. Now that may be jarring to you as well, but I hope you'll lean into this conversation because this isn't some average Joe who just picked up his Bible yesterday and started telling people what he thinks. Dr. Delman Coates is a Bible scholar at the PhD level, went to Harvard and other institutions I can't even remember right now. He is a New Testament scholar who speaks 5 or 6 different languages. Like, this dude is legit. So this episode was originally just an installment of Christian Conversations, which is a live stream that I do in our Patreon community. But since Myron the Mystic was available to hop in, he joined me for this conversation, and Dr. Coates happened to be available as well. So then he jumped in for the conversation. So you're going to get a little bit of the three of us. And in the beginning, Pamela's going to be there as well because she was helping me with some technical stuff in the background. But let me tell you now, get out your notepad because Dr. Coates didn't know about the dollar jar prior to showing up. So there's going to be so many dollar jars in this episode. I actually was peer pressured into using big words on this episode. So I think I got away with one. You tell me in the comments if you know which one I got away with. But we tried not to let Dr. Coates or Myron the Mystic get away with too much at all. So we're going to start this episode about 30 minutes into the original recording. If you want to get the entire recording, subscribe to our Patreon. The link is in the show notes. The full-length recording is available in our free tier. So even if you can't contribute anything financially right now, you can subscribe for free and get access to this complete recording. And before we get started, let me just say, I know we've been a little bit sporadic with these podcast releases, and that's just because we're going through so much transition. Like, I'm going through a lot of transition professionally and personally, and it's not bad stuff. It's just a lot of stuff. So it takes a whole lot to manage all of that, and I haven't been able to keep up with the schedule. So just bear with me until we can get everything kind of leveled out. Our podcast recording schedule may be a bit sporadic, but I'm going to still try to make sure I do at least 2 drops a month. And of course, anything else you want to get, we're constantly doing stuff in Patreon, in our free tier and our paid tiers, in our ecosystem with all of our connection groups. We have meetups throughout the month, all types of stuff. So there's still a lot going on. Just on the public platforms, it's going to be a little bit sporadic during this transition. So thank you for your patience. And again, if you want to subscribe to Patreon, to our free tier, or if you want to support financially, the link is in the show notes. All right, you know what to do. Pull up a chair, light a stick if you want, and pour a dram if you please, as we deconstruct harmful theology and build beloved community one cigar at a time. Let's get to it. Yeah. I'm glad y'all enjoyed it. That was
that was all right. That was a blessing.
That was the sermonic solo. So here's the message from Dr. Coates, and we'll get into it.
Why did the church change the meaning of fornication from a critique of a system of sexual exploitation to policing people's personal and consensual sexual choices? Like, how did Christianity go from critiquing sex trafficking and sexual exploitation to prohibiting premarital sex as a sign of somebody's holiness? That's what we should be asking. Well, the answer is to be found in what happened when Christianity went from being a minor religion in the first century to being the imperial religion across Europe centuries later. See, in the first century, Christian writers espoused views and teachings that challenged the state, that challenged the wealthy, that challenged those in power. Simple phrases like calling Jesus the Son of God was a challenge to the Roman government, which regarded Caesar as the Son of God. And so to teach Christians, as Paul does, to flee fornication was to encourage them to not support a system of sexual and economic exploitation that wealthy men in the Roman Empire and those who were in political authority profited from. It meant when Paul taught to flee fornication, it meant that those who followed Jesus in the first century could not see themselves supporting politicians, Donald Trump, and supporting wealthy men, Jeffrey Epstein, who gained prominence by hosting parties for women and young males being sex trafficked as prostitutes. But as Christianity grew and spread and gained popularity throughout Europe from the 2nd century to the 13th century, Christianity became the official religion of the state. And as such, the church needed to shift its moral paradigm from challenging systems of domination and power to a preoccupation with people's personal choices. And so, to be less threatening to those in power, the church needed to identify and to select and to elevate preachers who focus more on matters of individual morality and ignored matters of public morality. Y'all don't mind if I teach it before I preach it, do you? In the same way that slave owners in America needed religious leaders who would define salvation in terms of saving an individual.
Yo,
that was glorious.
He is preaching that thing. My favorite part was when he said, as a measure of somebody's holiness.
That's it. I love that he had a little tune in his voice. My God, come on, Reverend. If there's any reason to hoop, it's being free. Come on.
That's the kind of message you cast to your TV and then you stand up the whole time.
Yeah.
The whole time.
Right?
Absolutely. So I want to get it started here, and then Myron, I want to see what that brought up for you, because we came here obviously to talk about fornication and what the historical, cultural context of the term is, the linguistic, etymological study of the term, like all of these different things that go into the biblical scholarship. I also just want to level set the theology that I espouse, right? Greatest Commandment theology, because there are a number of ways you can, approach this conversation. So a lot of times people like to approach conversations of morality from let's look at what the Bible says about it. And what does the Bible actually say? What is, the meaning of the term? Who was talking? Who are they talking to? And they approach it from a scholarship perspective. I don't start with the scholarship. I like the scholarship, We gonna talk about the scholarship, but the scholarship isn't where I start. I start with the basic paradigm. I start with not so much what does the Bible say? I start with how do we read the Bible? So when we developed a sexual ethic at TFC, it wasn't necessarily a case of let's go through the Bible and see everywhere we see fornication, and let's unpack every text about fornication so we can be sure that we have the right scholarship. That's not how we did that. We used the Greatest Commandment, and we said, how does the Greatest Commandment apply to sex? That's how we built out a sexual ethic. And that's what I do personally, because the Bible is diverse. The Bible says a lot of things. And depending on what the topic is, the Bible does not have a good record on certain topics. You know, I was looking at the Greek term porneia, which is the term that is used to establish this fornication standard. And it, you know, it comes up 3 times in the New Testament. And when I was reading in Colossians, I was trying to figure out, okay, what's the context of the term being used here? And Colossians didn't give me a whole lot of context clues around the term. And I kept reading, and I got to the bottom of that chapter, and it said, slaves, obey your masters, right? For your reward is in heaven. And it reminded me, oh yeah, whether I understand the context of this term or not, the Bible don't get everything right. You know what I'm saying? So that's I do that to hopefully like lower the stakes of getting the scholarship right. We gonna get the scholarship together. I also want to lower the stakes. I don't want our entire theology to be built on, do I have the exact correct scholarship? Because you don't have a Myron handy every day to tell you the scholarship. You don't have a New Testament scholar like Delman Coates to jump on your live and tell you the scholarship every time. So I just wanted to establish that, just to kind of lower the stakes. Like we gonna get into all of that, but we asked the question, how does the Greatest Commandment apply here? So when it comes to sex, how does the Greatest Commandment apply? Regardless of what you know about what fornication means. Byron.
Oh, Smith, this was, I mean, what a beautiful setup. I first want to classify what you are. You are a pastoral theologian.
Yeah.
And I just resurrected that term a couple weeks ago, right? I hadn't used it in a very long time, but when I think about the term, I definitely think about you because you focus on how do we live this stuff out in practice?
Yeah.
How do we practice theology within community? Right. And then how do we humanize ourselves in the process? Because a part of our interplay with the divine is not just discovering the divine, it's also discovering ourselves.
Yes. Yes.
Right. I think it's John who said, how can we love God whom we have not seen, but we hate our brother who we see every day? That's the biblical text. So if we don't have a discussion about how to live in community with one another, and then ultimately in community with ourselves, then ultimately we're not doing the correct theological work that we need to do. All right. So that's that. But yeah, let's talk about this. So I took a different approach, and then I'm gonna get into the New Testament approach. And y'all, there is one that is coming that is mightier than I. So I'm gonna try to do a dip and dabble into New Testament theology, but Dr. Coates is the greatest, right? From Harvard and Columbia, and I am from white conservative schools in Middle America. So one, I think we always have to redefine the biblical sexual ethic as we look throughout the lens of the entire scripture, is one, because it's not clear. So the Bible gives us many different directives as it relates to sexual ethics, right? So from the Old Testament to the New Testament, everybody is saying something different and everybody is doing something different, from the move from polygamy to monogamy to having to sleep with your brother's wife if you die, like that. It's not clear as it relates to what the biblical ethic is as it relates to sex. And so for us to pre-impose an ethic on the text, I think is an irresponsible reading of the text. Smith, you say it all the time. I take the Bible too seriously to take it literally. So I've got to understand what the text is attempting to do over the course of time. And then when I realize that it's no consistent message over the course of time, so it's definitely not clear.
Dan McClellan refers to that as the Bible is not univocal.
It is. There it is. There it is. Yep.
Yeah.
We talked about that in Bible
voice.
and Beyond, univocality, right? So that the text has multiple voices and multiple ideas that surface after that, right?
So Randall, before you continue, because I want you to continue, but I also want to take an opportunity, because we have a guest here. We have a preacher in the house.
Oh my God. I'm about to say, listen, I'm ready to shut it down.
No. I still want to hear what you got to say, but I do want to bring him up because I'm really excited to have him here. I first encountered Dr. Delman Coates when I was a member of House of Hope in Atlanta, where E. Dewey Smith was the pastor, and he brought him in to preach and teach. And I remember even then, like, they were like, yeah, he has an affirming church. And at that point in time, I didn't even know if that was in my future. I just thought that was dope. Like, wow, like he's really
that's interesting, right? Like, okay.
Yeah. So I had only seen him from afar until he preached this message. And, everybody was sending it to me. And he actually hit me up and was like, yo, what you think about this? And I was like, dude, it's Delman Coates. So we've been like having exchange the past few weeks. And I'm just excited, TFC, to introduce y'all to Dr. Delman Coates of Mount Eden. Yes.
I'm sorry I couldn't. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you right at 7:30, but I have my own Bible study tonight. As you can imagine, we've had so many questions come in about this sermon series, where the pastor actually got in the pulpit and said that premarital sex is not a sin, right?
Yeah.
And I've just been fielding questions, not just on this topic, but on a range of other topics that I've been covering in this sermon series entitled Practicing Safe Text. And so I'm sorry I couldn't be on right at 7:30, and I missed the first portion of the conversation.
Oh no, it's all right. It's all right. We just glad to have you here. I know everybody's excited. Can you see the comments over there?
I do.
Yeah. The saints are welcoming you. So we're gonna have a good time and get deeper into this conversation. Myron was giving some feedback based on your video. Before you jumped in, we played the clip of that 3-minute clip. So Myron was giving some feedback. Oh, by the way, this is my wife, Pamela.
Yes, hi, Pamela.
Yes. And Myron. So Myron, go ahead and like continue with what you were sharing in regards to this.
So I was just saying that the if you look at it throughout the entire lens of Scripture, it's not clear. There is no clear ethic for sex because everybody's doing something different. Every moment in time, there is something different that kind of establishes itself as the ethic of Israel, of the Christians, of the early church. All of them are doing something different. So it's really not a clear message. And then when you get to Paul, especially in 1 Corinthians 7, when he's talking about marriage and things like that, we really get this weird contradictory thing, because Jesus said one thing and then Paul is saying something different. And then he starts to use this word porneia, which nobody really knows what it means. Honestly, the consensus is like, we think we know, we think we can identify, but really everybody is kind of postulating what it actually means. And then we create our doctrine off of something that we have postulated as opposed to something that we know for sure. And we put people in bondage by that postulation as opposed to giving people the freedom to discover what resonates with themselves.
I knew it. You trying to get away with these dollar jar words. But so Dr. Coates, when we're doing the podcast, we have this rule about academic terms. And if you say an academic term and you don't define it, you get hit with the dollar jar. And
Oh, wow.
as soon as Myron said postulate, I said somebody gonna hit him.
I'm
So
glad you told me that because I'll be broke. So now I know.
I already
should be
know.
broke.
No, yeah.
My goodness.
So Myron, welcome back.
This is not the podcast.
No, you said something though that made me think like about how the word porneia could mean different things, right? And goes back to the fact that like translation is an act of interpretation. And I know Dr. Coates is going to be able to expound on that a whole lot better. Because like when you have a term in a different language, particularly an ancient language, and you're trying to translate it through the ages, through all of the cultural shifts and everything, you can walk away with multiple like interpretations of that. So we always got to keep that in mind. Even the Bible version that you read, there's an interpretation that goes into that translation that you have. And there are those decisions usually support somebody's agenda.
Right. Christian, can I jump in right? I want to respond to what Myron was sharing. I think he's right. There are many different, I'm going to get a flag on this, multivalences in scripture, right? And so you're right. From beginning to end, we see all different types of arrangements acknowledged. But one of the things I think is consistent when it comes to sexual ethics, that what is being critiqued are acts of sexual violence, rape, abuse, and exploitation. None of these texts, I contend, are condemnations of consensual sexual ethical behavior, whether it's mono, poly, same gender loving. The theme for me that's clear is that ethically, the notion that these texts are condemning people's consensual, open, honest, loving choices and decisions is something that is decidedly against. I'm looking at the comments. I think I got some flags for a moment. Okay, let me stop. And so I think that's an important theme that's consistent, Myron. And I think it really goes against the prevailing. Now, why did y'all have to tell me about this rule? Because now I'm policing myself. It really goes against the prevailing appropriation, application of scripture when it comes to these texts. Now, as it relates to what porneia means,
let's talk about
I made the case in this sermon series that the word porneia is very clear in the New Testament to be about prostitution.
All right.
And all of the confusion that's transpired over the last 10 days since I preached this message is really not about the New Testament. What it is really about is the way in which we center white elite male exegetes, theologians, and commentators and Bible scholars. And we presume that their interpretive conclusions reflect God. But a Black male scholar, Bible scholar, who happens to be a pastor, who reads Greek, Hebrew, French, German, Latin, Coptic, or the conclusions of Reverend Raquel Letzum, who has a PhD in New Testament. I remember Raquel was doing her PhD at Princeton at or around the time I was doing my PhD at Columbia, who has, chimed in on this topic in some very important ways and affirmed the notion that these texts are critiques of sexual violence and exploitation. And for those of us who come from subaltern groups or oppressed groups, it matters when committees shift a term that is clearly about sexual abuse, the commodification and exploitation of people's bodies, the way in which governments profited off of that matters. And changing that meaning, right, to an issue of personal piety is deeply problematic for me, for a Black woman scholar. So I've been responding to all of these people, some who've sent questions to the church, others on social media, who always say things like, well, what's your source? Or what about one of the things I share with our church tonight that I really value, that I did my PhD under Vincent Wimbush, who's one of the preeminent African-American scholars in New Testament. He was the first African-American to be president of the Society of Biblical Literature. But one of the things I really appreciate about our program is that he really challenged us to decenter these, received classical, interpretive, and exegetical resources as if they are more authoritative than my right and your right to interpret scripture for ourselves. And so this is very important. This work that we're doing and the conversation that you all are having is so critically important, because when I first came to my church, the reason I started this Practicing Safe Text series is because when I first came to the church 21 years ago, people were literally in bondage in my church around divorce, because there were leading pastors in our area who told them that if you've been divorced, I'm looking at the comments, I've been flagged so many times.
You all right?
I didn't know this was a rule. You didn't let me know. I did not come prepared for this.
It's some stuff you just gotta learn on the fly.
Yeah,
that's all right. We'll give you a discount. It won't be $1. It'll be 75 cents.
Yeah, but divorce was the thing for them. Like, they were really in spiritual bondage because pastors in our area had told them that if they had been remarried, they were in sin. That if they had been divorced, they could not be leaders in the church. And people were really struggling with that. And I had to help them to understand, look, I know you see the English word divorce in Matthew chapter 5, but that passage is not talking about two people dissolving their marriage in a legal way. Not at all. And so this sermon series is really based on the notion that I think that there are several words in our English translations of the New Testament of the Bible that we shouldn't even use anymore. And this happens all the time. Yeah. Committees change their translations all the time. Some of those, we should not use the word divorce when it comes to Matthew chapter 5, because that when people see that word divorce, they believe that that text is talking about a marriage being legally dissolved, and it's not.
Right.
It's talking about a practice in the ancient world in which men could just throw out, discard, lock out their wives. The wives could go to the grocery store, come back home, and they'd be locked out. And the man could do that for any reason. And Jesus concludes what he's trying to do is to elevate the status of women in a context in which they could be left socially and economically vulnerable if they were locked out like that in these small towns of 200 to 300 people on average, when everyone knew she was married to Bob, or Jamal, I should say.
Right.
And so if she's at happy hour on Friday, why is she out here trying to hook up with someone else? So Jesus is trying to elevate the status of women by saying, look, don't do that. The only allowance I'm going to give you to do that is if porneia is involved, if she's prostituted herself, not sexual immorality, not if she's been unfaithful, not for the cause of unchastity, as you see in many translations, but prostitution. I think that even in 1 Corinthians, using the term sexual immorality is too general. It's too vague. Mm-hmm. If you talk to 5 people, you're going to get 10 interpretations around what that means. Porneia is very clear, is very specific. It's talking about prostitution, which was the problem in Corinth. It's the problem in chapter 5, in chapter 6, in chapter 7, and in chapter 11, when Paul is talking about women not having your hair short, because the issue was the Corinthians had written him a letter asking him, how do we tell the difference between Corinthian women, Christian women, and these temple prostitutes next door who have their hair short? Apparently, some of the brothers at the First Corinthian church were getting lost on their way to worship because they couldn't tell the difference. The whole issue, I contend, is about the immorality of participating in this kind of sex trafficking.
Yo,
I mean, sexual exploitation.
we in class tonight, in case y'all hadn't noticed. This is a world-class education that we getting here. And Dr. Coach, you said so many things. There was one thing you said that I just wanted to piggyback on, because earlier. So tell me, Dr. Coates, do you usually catch this much hell on social media?
Well, 12 years ago, 13 years ago, I came out very publicly in support of LGBTQ rights. Some of the people know about that. I took very public statements in support of marriage equality legislation in the state of Maryland and around the country in support of that. And my position, and this is very important, because some people of faith, some Christians who support LGBTQ rights, they talk about it as if they're supporting Q plus rights despite the Bible.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, we know the Bible condemns it, but we should love everybody. That's the radical love ethic of Jesus, right? But I don't support LGBTQ plus rights despite the Bible by like suspending the Bible because we know scripture says it's wrong. I do so because of it. It's clear to me that there are no texts in the Bible, none, zero, nada, nunca, no texts in the Bible that condemn consensual same-gender loving people or consensual same-gender loving sex acts. And so back in 2012, I came out publicly in support of marriage equality legislation in Maryland. I was on Love and Hip Hop special, Out in Hip Hop on MTV, and talked about that. That anyone who regards themselves as being in the Black church tradition really needs to rethink their perspective and approach to this topic, because there's a difference between the Black church and a church of Blacks. The Black church refers to that that tradition of African-American sacred spirituality that's been on the side of the fight for freedom, justice, and equality. That's the Black church tradition. Just because a church is filled with Blacks does not mean it's in the Black church tradition. And so for me, and so back then, yeah, it was a rough time. I took a lot of heat from it professionally. Some of it resulted in me losing positions in some leading clergy organizations and groups. I experienced a good deal of disfellowshipping among clergy, but here's what I found. 2012 was the best year in the history of our church in terms of growth.
Wow.
It still has been the case. We added more people, 1,200, which for us was a lot that year than we have in the history of our church. And I think that's because a lot of times, Black clergy, and I love Black preaching. I love, the brethren, sisters, right. But Black preachers can be like the stock market, a lagging indicator. And the notion that because this handful of very charismatic leaders in the pulpit are espousing a view that's necessarily a reflection of the people's opinions in the pews, it's not so. And what we found in Maryland is that the people in the pews were much further along and did not want to be on the side of codifying discrimination under the law, regardless of what their pastor talked about. And so it has happened periodically. This recent iteration around this sermon, has really upset the apple cart for a lot of people in some interesting ways. But I think it's a
Yeah.
good opportunity.
Yeah. When I shared it on my platform, of course, people are in the comments just up in arms, upset, like you said, asking you what's your source. And you and I had an exchange earlier, and I was like, these people don't value your scholarship. they don't, they don't care about scholarship. And Dr. Cole said to me, so like, what do they value? And I said, familiarity.
Right.
And the reality is, going back to what you said earlier about centering white voices, we don't understand in the Black church that so much of our theology was formulated by white voices.
Mhm.
We have been indoctrinated to believe that it just fell from the sky.
Right.
Like Sky Daddy God spoke directly to the church and said, this is exactly how I want you to do it. We don't understand the history of doctrinal formulation. We don't understand how doctrines come to be and how certain interpretations are emphasized over other interpretations, and certain messages and moralities are emphasized over others to create the doctrine that we have inherited, that was a lot of times imposed on our ancestors by those who enslaved them. So it's difficult for people to hear a Black scholar say something different, because familiarity is what feels good. There is safety in this bondage. When all you've ever known is theological bondage, freedom is scary as hell.
Yeah.
So when you come offering freedom to people, like, hey, you don't have to be bound by this poor teaching of fornication, they like, the hell you say?
Right.
This bondage is comfortable for me.
Right. Yeah, and it's really it trips me out because people really struggle with, so are you saying people struggle with, so what do I tell my kids? What do I tell my grandkids? And I tell them, what you do is you tell them that sex is good, it's from God, it's pleasurable, it's enjoyable. And like any appetite, right? There's a healthy end of the spectrum on it, and there could be an unhealthy end of the spectrum on it. And, as I shared in that message, I think it's important for us to think about shifting from prescriptive ethics to a more regulatory ethics. I don't know if that's a flag. But in that world, I think it's important for us to think about sex not as a problem to be solved. It's not a problem you can solve. And you certainly can't solve it through denial, because that ain't working. It's more of a paradox to be managed. I got that from Esther Perel. She's talking about monogamy and poly at the time, but she talks about, relationships, people need to view them not as problems to be solved. Like we develop this system structure and like, that's it. These are more paradoxes to be managed. And the way I think about sex, it's an appetite to be managed. And you exercise responsibility. You use knowledge, wisdom, understanding. And there might be real reasons for people not to do it. But to build this architecture, to build this hedge around sex, I opened up Bible study tonight looking at Genesis chapter 3, verse 3, where the serpent asks Eve, hey, did God say y'all can't have any of the trees in the garden? She says that God says we can't eat of the tree in the middle of the garden and don't touch it. Now, if you look at Genesis chapter 2, verses 16 and 17, God never said don't touch it. And so there's a tradition of rabbinic exegesis or midrash on Genesis that says the problem there is that she put too much of a hedge around God's command, right? And what ended up happening? Right after saying God said, don't eat it and don't touch it, what did they end up doing? Eating it and touching it.
Absolutely.
So just because you scare people and build up this fear-based approach to a topic, it doesn't mean that they're not going to do it. And from the beginning to today, this sort of fear-based approach to faith and religion and spirituality, it's not working with people. We have to free people, liberate them from all these unnecessary doctrines and dogmas that certainly are not biblically based, and really empower people to make responsible decisions and, to help them know, hey, look, it's consequences to everything. But, you are empowered to make choices and decisions and to do that in a responsible way.
So I gotta acknowledge what you just said in two ways. First, we gotta do this. And then welcome to the platform, because you done got carried away. When you said rabbinic exegesis,
Oh, wow. Where's your cash at?
and, so please now, but I think rabbinic exegesis, or like you said, midrash, is a very important concept for the laity to be aware of. So can you just explain to those of us who are watching, what is midrash?
Yeah, so midrash is the collection of secondary exegetical commentaries on the Torah by the rabbis. There are many different schools of there are many different schools. There are many different
75 cents is
schools.
not the whole.
There are many different schools of rabbinic commentary. It's rabbinic commentary on the Torah. Okay. And midrash is a collection of those commentaries. And there's a tradition of rabbinic commentary on Genesis that just talks about where, Eve may have gotten wrong and where she went off track. And one talks about she went off track because she put too much of a hedge around God's original command. And that's my point, because people may perceive that certain types of sex has a certain potential to be problematic. They put such a hedge around it. And I don't think that's healthy for people to live out healthy spiritual lives and then walk with God.
Yes. Midrash, if I could, and before I do that, because that was real great. That was helpful. Like if I could contextualize it even further, like midrash is like us. We're like rabbis in our context, and we're getting together and we're sharing commentary on our sacred text.
Mm-hmm.
So if we were to like publish that, that would be like the equivalent, like, yo, here's some commentary that we have on these sacred texts that we value, and here are our varying perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
And in the church, we don't even understand that that's a thing, that varying perspectives are allowed.
Yeah.
We are indoctrinated to believe the truth is what I got in my church, and the rest of y'all going to hell.
Yep.
Well, that's so important, because if people would just think about the message that the church fathers are sending us by placing in the canon 4 different witnesses to the experience of Jesus, like the message, because Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, while people have harmonized them in their heads, people fail to realize that the chronology, the geography, the order of the different stories, the inclusion and omission of different stories. I mean, Mark doesn't even have a resurrection story, but the mere fact that the church fathers kind of include these 4 witnesses in the canon in and of itself is making a statement that in the church, we can have unity and acknowledge and celebrate our diversity, that we don't have to all think alike, look alike, dress alike, speak the same way, shout at the same time in order to be a part of the same community. I tell folks at Mount Enon, look, these are my thoughts about these texts. I'm just sharing with you the benefit of my reflection, my study on these texts. You are not obligated to receive what I share, on this topic or any other topic. I ask y'all to tithe, but y'all don't do that. So what's the point? Why do you feel like you have to accept this? So yeah, I think what makes Christianity and what enabled Christianity to grow and flourish at one time is its capacity to celebrate difference and diversity. And what we have to remember is that orthopraxy predated, oh God, I did it again. Orthopraxy predated orthodoxy.
Talk about it.
I'm with you. That's it, sir.
So there, the focus in the early church was not orthodoxy. Orthodoxy is a technical academic term which simply means right thinking. And it ends up in it, and it's the drive or the impulse of the church when Christianity becomes the official religion of the empire in let's say, the beginning of the 4th century. If Christianity is going to become the official religion of the empire, then we can't have all of this difference. Yeah. We can't have all of this diversity. We can't have Christians in Syria, celebrating Christmas on one calendar from those in Egypt. We can't have Monophysite Christians in Egypt and then dual Christians in Syria who have a dualistic understanding of the nature of Christ, and then others having this. We have to work that out. And we have to all think alike. We have to believe the same thing. Yes. This is the drive and the impulse that people struggle with today. Mm-hmm. Because like, oh my God, I can't believe there's this person saying something different. Well, difference and diversity was there in the beginning. In the beginning, there was difference and diversity, right? Yeah. I don't want to get into the failed quest for the historical Jesus, but it is a failed quest. What we know are early Christian communities, plural, not early Christianity, but early Christianities. Yes. There are so many early different witnesses at the very beginning, and we are heirs and legatees of their diverse reflections, their diverse experiences and encounters. And that's something to celebrate, not something for us to resist or to reject.
Listen, I got a question here. Dr. Coates, could you talk to us about language, right? Because something means something today doesn't mean that it meant something back then, right? Because obviously when you look at the word porneia, and I'm going backwards here a bit, folks, I acknowledge that, it's where we get our English word pornography from. And so there's this association that, it's pornography, right? So tell us how language shifts over time and how we should look at the biblical text as it relates to language.
It's a very good question. You just said it. Language shifts over time. I mean, just take, I was thinking about this the other day. Take the expression that the sisters use when they say they got their face beat. Mm-hmm. I'm going to this, I got my face beat. Now, if you take that phrase and you share it with some English-speaking person in the UK, they would literally think that someone was just assaulted. Mm-hmm. Not only does language change over time, language changes within time, within context. And so I think it changes, and people need to be sensitive to that. It changes. For example, think about the confusion we had in the church around speaking in tongues. Mm-hmm. How people will literally conflate the English word tongues in 1 Corinthians with the whole concept of tongues in the book of Acts.
Yeah, glossolalia and xenoglossolalia.
And really totally miss. And we misunderstand what the word interpretation means. Because the word hermeneia in 1 Corinthians, we hear that and we think an interpreter is like if you go to the United Nations and someone is speaking Russian, someone hears that and they interpret it for someone else. But I've written before, and I've really had to find those papers, but scholars have talked about, the word hermeneia is not translation from one person to another person. It means to put into words an experience. So the gift, I contend, of hermeneia glosson is not one person hearing someone speaking glossolalia and saying, oh, I know what that means. Tie your shoes. It's the person who has this ecstatic experience having the ability to put it into words. That's hermeneia of glosson. It's not translation. I contend it's the gift of putting this supernatural experience into words so that people can understand it. Now y'all cutting up, but yeah,
you gotta understand, we got a bunch of Pentecostal church kids in here.
Words do change over time, and we need to be sensitive to that. When I get to the part of the sermon series that deals with homosexuality,
oh boy,
oh my,
that's going to be very important for people to keep in mind. A very good documentary your audience should watch, I'm sure you've shared it with them already, is the 1946 documentary. And in that documentary, people see how when the committee of the Authorized Standard Version of the Bible used the word homosexuality in its Authorized or Revised Standard Version in 1946, the term homosexual meant something completely different than the notion of consensual same-gender loving people by the time we get to the 60s. And so people wrote the original committee letters about that, and they eventually changed that because they were not referring to consensual same-gender loving people when they put homosexuals in the English translations of that in 1946. And yet people later on read that and read it through their own prism, through their own lens. And people definitely need to be mindful that not only do words change, Myron, but we're going through Greek and then Latin. I mean, fornication, the word fornication comes to us not from the Greek, but it's coming to us through Latin, which means fornix, which is about to sell, selling in brothels. I mean, words not only change through time, but they change across context. There's so many intermediary steps between you reading the Message translation or the Amplified Bible or the Good News Bible to these first century texts. And readers, it doesn't mean that I don't read those translations. I do, right? But you have to have the mental, the intellectual, spiritual dexterity enough to take in all of the counsel of feedback so that we can arrive at a more careful interpretation of these texts.
Yeah. One thing I want to say this real quick, Randall. One thing that comes to mind as far as like language changing over time, like even if you just look at it in real time, I'm gonna give you a great example. The term woke.
Right.
It has taken on these different meanings because of how white culture has appropriated it and turned it into something else. So if you were to look into what does woke mean, it would change in meaning depending on who you cite. Because if you ask a Black scholar what woke means, it's going to mean one thing. If you ask Charlie Kirk,
sure,
or Donald Trump, or Elon Musk, or Ben Shapiro what woke means, it means something else. If you ask a progressive white scholar or theologian what woke means, it's going to mean something else to them that it meant to the white Christian nationalists, which was different from the Black folk who created the term. So that's just in our present context. In our present context. So you got to remember, when we're doing biblical scholarship, we're looking at words that have traveled through multiple languages over the course of millennia. Millennia.
Yeah, sure enough.
You know, go ahead, Randall.
Well, I just wanted to, Dr. Coates, you talked about Midrash, and I want to say that Midrash hasn't stopped, right?
No,
We
it
still
hasn't.
do that.
Yeah.
I mean, you talked about Dr. Wimbush being the head of SBL. SBL essentially is Midrash. We come together, we discuss words, we discuss ideas, and we offer new definitions and new terms and think about them in new ways. And so theology continues to grow and to develop and is not a static tradition. It's not static in any way.
And that's refreshing.
Yeah.
And we got that within the New Testament. When Christians are taking these Jewish rituals and, refashion, and reformulating them, they are updating these traditions that they had inherited. It's constant. It's growing. That's what makes, the journey of faith so refreshing. It's when people think that it's fixed. That's my issue, Myron. That's
agree.
Christian. That's the thing that I struggle with. Where people, I want to grow. I mean, I hope that what I understand, tomorrow exposes what I understand today. I want to learn something new and different. I don't regard that as a threat. I don't feel that means that I've been deceived. No, I want to grow. I struggle with Christians who think that they know it all, have it all. They have God in a box. I don't want my God to be in a box.
I'm with you.
And so we are constantly engaged in the process of commentary and interpretation. Midrash was just a formal canonization of that process in a particular period, but we're constantly engaging in exegetical commentary.
I agree. And something that hit me when you just said that is, if we put God in a box, we put ourselves in a box as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Because if we're built in reflection of that great God, if I put that God in a box, that means I'm only limited to what that box can be and what that box can do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And a lot of times, a lot of people have been told, in terms of understanding the scripture that has been weaponized against so many of us, is lean not into your own understanding. Mm-hmm. And the same Bible says, in all of thy getting, get an understanding.
Yeah.
Right. So, when people throw that at you, consider that, again, the Bible is not univocal. And in all of thy getting, get an understanding is a very powerful biblical statement, that we should seek understanding, that the greatest commandment is that we love God with our heart, soul, mind.
Yeah.
We love God with our mind and our seeking of understanding. That is an expression of our love for God, our seeking of understanding, having the courage to ask questions, having the courage to think critically about what we are asked to believe. That is loving God with your mind, and all of you're getting, get an understanding. And Dr. Coates, I would love to know, have you always been here on the topic of fornication, or have you evolved to this place in your understanding of fornication?
No, that's a good question. I think ever since I started my journey to doing a PhD in Bible, my first week in college at Morehouse College, I was given a copy of Stony the Road We Trod. Dean Carter at Morehouse, the dean of the chapel, gave all of the entering freshmen who felt a call to ministry a copy of Stony the Road We Trod, which came out that fall. I read the introduction where Kane Hope Felder talks about the challenges of African Americans going into the field of biblical studies and not knowing the language, the philological requirement being the main obstacle, having to know all the languages. I decided that week at 18, that's what I'm doing, because, I love the word. I wanted to study. I wanted more knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. And, early on, I studied all these, issues, fornication, speaking in tongues, all of these divisive issues at that time, fornication, speaking in tongues, same gender loving relationships, homosexuality. And so I would say, I don't think that I ever, I just didn't come up in a rigid church environment. I didn't come up in a fundamentalist environment anyway. So I didn't really come to the, you know, I just may not have had the formal language to express it. And so I would say early on in my academic study as a freshman, I talked about, oh, fornication doesn't mean premarital sex.
Early on.
Very early.
Now listen,
Wow.
I can't let you slide for philological. I can't do it. I'm on your
What am
side
I
here,
up
Doc.
to
But
now?
I
I'm
mean,
like
you can't.
$10. I'm like, oh, like $20 now, huh?
Listen,
Yeah. So once
I can't
again, this is for you, Dr. Coates.
Thank you for keeping me accountable. I had people texting me right now saying, I'm thankful for this platform that's forcing you to explain these terms.
all the deacons in your church are like, we've been waiting for him to do this. Okay.
I was in a Bible study and I said something like, because what I was trying to explain to people on fornication is that waiting till you get married in the first century meant waiting till you're 13 if you're a girl and 19 to 21 if you're a male. It wasn't waiting until you're
45.
45. And furthermore, life expectancy was 35 in antiquity on average, 35 to 38. And so I said, the notion of requiring people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s to wait to have sex till you get married was not a part of the ethical discourse of antiquity.
Couldn't have been.
Right. Now, I understood what that meant, but people are like, do you have to speak this way? Like, what is all of this? Right? Ethical discourse of antiquity. But philological. We need more. Look, I want to say this. My last year at Harvard Divinity School, I seriously contemplated not getting a PhD in biblical studies. At the time, I saw other pastors getting MBAs. And I thought, if I want to pastor, maybe I should get a degree that's more practical. And so I contemplated not doing a PhD and doing an MBA or going to the Kennedy School of Government. What I did my last year at Harvard, this was, 27 years ago, I flew to Atlanta and I met with 3 men. I met with a fourth on my way to Atlanta. I met with Charles Adams, the late Dr. Charles Adams. I met with Dean Lawrence Carter, Dean of the Chapel at Morehouse. I met with Dr. Aaron Parker, who pastors Zion Hill Baptist Church in Atlanta.
Love Aaron Parker.
Who's a pastor who has a PhD in systematic theology.
From Emory. Yeah.
And the final pastor I met with was Dr. William Flippin at Greater Piney Grove. And I asked all of these men, is it really necessary for me to do a PhD if I think I want to pastor? Now, I expected Dr. Adams, Dean Carter, and Parker to tell me yes. But I expected William Flippin to say, yeah, that's really that's not necessary, son. We need, because he likes to say, son, we need to go on in ministry. Go ahead and pastor, do a business degree. That's William Flippin said to me, the Black church is going to be better because you get a PhD in Bible, in biblical studies. And I'm so thankful to all of those men, and in particular, Dr. William Flippin of the Greater Piney Grove Baptist Church in Atlanta, Glenwood Avenue, who encouraged me to stay the course, who let me know that there were very few Blacks who had done the philological work, Myron. Philology is the study of languages. To do a PhD, you've got to do Greek and Hebrew. You have to do the theological languages of French and German, because the French and the Germans were like the first to kind of do a lot of the heavy theological work. You have to do supplemental languages. I did Latin and Coptic. And so he encouraged me. He said, there are very few young men and women who have studied these languages to be in this position. And the Black church is going to be better because you did that. And I'm thankful. I'm here today. You're talking to me today because I pursued that path, all because of my love for God and the church, the Black church, and my reverence for the authority of Scripture.
Yes.
So good.
Yes. And to that point, that's the difference between a Bible scholar, which is what Dr. Coates is, and me. I'm a theologian. Now, he's a theologian too, but he's a theologian and a Bible scholar. I am not a Bible scholar. I didn't like biblical languages. I took 2 classes on Greek. I took 1 class on Hebrew, and that was enough. Right? But when you're dealing with somebody like Dr. Coates, he can sit and read the New Testament in Greek. That's the level of scholarship he has committed himself to. And we don't get that in the Black pulpit frequently. We don't get that level of scholarship where his level of study, rigorous study, is on par with anybody who has formulated any doctrine that we've ever believed.
Yeah.
Like the Apostle Paul is not closer to God than Delman Coates.
Right.
The Apostle Paul doesn't know more about God and theology than Delman Coates. Like we all have a theology. We all have a relationship with God. We all have our studies and what we have learned. And some of us have just learned a whole lot more than the rest of us. And that's what we're blessed with tonight with Dr. Coates. So
man,
we really appreciate you,
because I'm not a theologian. Like I could not have studied theology.
Really?
I struggled with theology and philosophy when I was in the philosophy and religion.
And I love it.
College.
Really, that's my area. That's what I do.
Yes.
When I listen to you guys, I marvel. We need your voices. We need your intellect. We need your perspective. I'm a historian. I'm not a theologically oriented in terms of my mind and my thoughts. I'm more, language, philology, Myron, linguistics, history. That's more my lane. But it really shows how we need these multiple sensibilities.
Yes.
We need ethicists. We need, psychologists. We need all of these different gifts, to help us arrive at a greater understanding of a healthy, informed sexual ethic. It's not just from listening to me. We now need some, sexologists to be at the table. Some relationship experts, people who are trauma informed to help us, really, and theologians as well. I'm just really trying to tease out one piece of this, but we need so many other gifts in the body so that we can help develop an ethic, a sexual ethic, where people can be healthy, whole, responsible, and happy, man. Like Jesus said, I came that you might have life, and have it more abundantly. Yes. And for me, that has to include sex in my mind. The Zoe kind of life that Jesus is talking about has to include sex, our sex life.
It got to. I can't see it any other way. I can't see it any other way.
Man,
I agree.
Randall, we about to wrap up. Did you want to say anything or ask anything before we wrap up?
No, this is great. I just want to add a quote from Dean Carter, right? Dean Carter told me once, he said, Myron, you can't have harmony with just one voice.
Yes. Unless you're Layla Hathaway.
There it is.
Unless you're Layla Hathaway.
Unless you're Layla Hathaway.
She can harmonize with herself.
I tried to say it like Dean Carter. Dr. Coates, Dean Carter has a unique way of turning a phrase. Yes.
Yes. So, Dr. Coates, as we get ready to wrap this up, if you just share one more thing with us, and this is like a different subject, but I think it's important for where we are. How are you navigating this political climate right now? And is there any wisdom you would be willing to share with us and how we all navigate it?
Well, we all know we're in a very serious crisis in our democracy. But I'm trying to navigate this moment by also trying to hold accountable our political friends, because I think the failure of our political friends to deliver for us creates the void and the vacuum that makes this type of thing possible. When people come out in Georgia in historic fashion in 2000 and elect 2 senators and send them to Washington to deliver for the Democrats, and this is, I want to try to keep this nonpartisan, but to deliver to the Democrats for the first time in 60 years, control of the House, the Senate, and the White House for the first time since the 60s. And yet they were not able to pass big, bold, broad policies, infrastructure policies, healthcare policies, true full employment policies. When people come out, but you're not able to deliver because you have Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema still stuck on this outdated understanding of fiscal and monetary policy, which prevents us from moving the ball forward, then we've got to hold our friends accountable as much as we hold our foes accountable. And so I'm right now really doing some work to really think through how we build momentum in a political bloc amongst those who have been our political allies and friends, because we have got to get them to understand what is at stake and to develop a vision for the country, that moves us beyond symbols, holidays, images, and tokens. I preached a sermon last year, and I said that the challenge with the Democrats is that they keep serving us symbols, holidays, images, and tokens. And I said, that's an acronym. And I put it on the screen, Christian. Symbols, holidays, images, and tokens. I said, it's an acronym. I said, I can't say it in the pulpit.
You can say it here, though.
I won't. You can't keep serving us symbols, holidays, images, and tokens, right? And not delivering for the people. And so I have a campaign. It's called the Our Money campaign. Our website is ourmoneyus.org, where we're building a broad-based political movement of trying to help people to understand a school of economics called modern monetary theory, and how we need to harness the full capacity and potential of the federal government spending capacity to deliver for the people. That's how I'm navigating this moment right now.
Wow. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And the saints in the chat have said it for you. We want the Democrats to stop serving shit.
Yeah. And if we can and the reason I'm doing this sermon series is because we can't get to that, the systemic stuff as Christians, because people think God is in heaven with a clipboard policing your body count. And until we get out of that kind of mindset, that's the only way we can shift over here to start talking about these systemic issues. So that's how I'm navigating this moment.
And we appreciate you for doing it from your context, with your perspective, with everything that you bring to the work. It takes so many different people to do so many different things to make all of this work. I believe it was my colleague Jamil Cannon who said, nobody has to do everything if everybody does something.
Yes, it.
So we appreciate you for doing your something in this work. Have you ever been to a HBCU homecoming? That's kind of what Dayfest is like at the faith community, minus the marching band and the football game. We come together in Atlanta in August and we sing, we laugh, we dance, we play, we do yoga, we have worship, we brunch, we talk about sex, we smoke cigars, we meet old friends, we make new friends. It's that one time of the year we ask everyone in our extended community to meet us in Atlanta, August 22nd through the 24th. And this year, we're going to have 2 or 3 special guests, including Danielle Thomas, aka the Unfit Christian, and Ebony Jasmine Harris, aka Jasmine's Garden. So if you want to meet us in Atlanta for Dayfest, August 22nd through the 24th, hit the link in the show notes and register today. Slots are filling fast.